Welcome once again to the Simple Truth. We're in Matthew chapter 24. We're going to be finishing up today on that particular chapter and maybe start 25. But to bring us up to date, we've gone through like verse 15 through 28, where we're talking about the Great Tribulation. It talked about at first in verse 15 about the abomination of desolation, which Daniel spoke about, which is when Antichrist will be into the temple and proclaim him as God. But where we're going to start at today is verse 29. And it is the coming of the Lord at his second coming that we're going to be looking at in these next three verses. So, verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Now, notice it's right after the 7-year period of tribulation, the 3.5 lesser tribulation. Then we have the middle of the week, and then we have the last 3.5 years of tribulation, which is the greater tribulation, when Antichrist will be in full power. The first 3.5 years, he is coming into power, but in the middle of the week, he becomes into power, and then he does all the terrible things that he does in the next 3.5 years. But immediately after that, we're talking about the coming of the Lord, his second coming, when he will come back and set foot on earth again. Verse 30, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So we see this picture that all the tribes of earth is going to see Christ coming back and all of his saints with him. And we'll see that he has the power of heaven and his great glory that's going to be seen by all people at that time. And then we come to the parable of the fig tree in verse 32. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branches was already become tender and putting forth leaves, you know that summer is near. Now, of course, fig trees would have been a common thing for them to see in Israel at the time. So he's not talking about just fig trees, and they're not, we don't need to put it to the representing of Israel. It could have been an oak tree. It could have been, any other kind of tree, a maple tree, any kind of tree at all, that in the spring when it buds, you know that spring is near. And it's just a sign to us that it is near. And he's using this as an illustration to show us that we can see the signs of his coming, but it's just the beginning of those signs. Verse 33, so you also, when you see all these things, which it is near at the door. Surely I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. So he's using this illustration that all the things that he's told us to be looking for. He tells us there's going to be rumors of wars. There's going to be pestilence. We live in this day of COVID-19. We will see those things. And yet he tells us back in chapter 24 and 23 that we are to know that it's coming, but we're not to worry about it. It's not yet here. Look at some of the things that's going on in the world today. More and more things are being sold on the internet. More and more banking is done on the internet. It is very conceivable that in the future that you won't have paper money or coins in your pocket. You will have internet moving your finances. And then also they are working with chips in other countries that so that they could put it in your hand and so they could tell what your medical records are. How easy would it be to add everything else? So we see all these things, but understand it's not yet here. We should be watching, we should be waiting and looking, but it's not here yet. This is spring when we see those things coming. He says that generation, this generation will not pass away until these things take place. He's talking about the generation before the tribulation period, the generation that will go through the tribulation and see the coming of the Lord, his second advent. Then that generation, it's not this generation today, or well, it could be, but it's not really speaking to this generation, but that generation that will see all these things happen. And then he says, heaven and earth will pass away. Now, when you look into the Greek of this, it is not that they will be annihilated, that they will be completely destroyed. This is more like they will be changed. Kind of remodeled, it may be a good word to use today. As you would remodel a room in your house, and God's going to remodel the heavens and earth at that time. But he says his word will never pass away. It is true when in the Old Testament, it was true when Jesus was walking here on the earth and teaching the disciples, and it is true now. It will always be true. So then we go on to verse 36. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Do you realize that Jesus is saying, while he was here on earth, he didn't even know the day and hour that he would come his second time. That is why even in the New Testament, at the times of the first century, right after Christ has died on the cross and raised again, they was looking for his second coming. As far as they was concerned, he was going to be able to come the next day. And of course, here we are 2,000 years or so into the future from the cross, and he still hasn't returned. I think there's going to be an event that happens before the tribulation period, and I believe that's the catching up of the saints, or the rapture, as we commonly call it. There's nothing that has to be done. It could happen at any moment. But I want you to understand that in this text, in this chapter 24, the rapture is never mentioned. Jesus doesn't talk about the rapture or the catching up. He is talking about Israel, and he's talking about those that will be alive at that time, so that we will be ready, that we will be watching for his return. And it's that kind of feeling that Christ is giving to us, though he's mainly talking about Israel, because the 70th week of Daniel, the 7-year period of the tribulation, that's going to be talking about Israel mainly. Okay? Now, let's go on verse 37. But as the days of Noah were, so also the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man. So here he's saying, take a look at Noah, the story of Noah, how he spent, we believe, 120 years building the ark, and there was only 8 people that came into the ark along with all the animals, and it said they was doing the same thing we're doing today. They was eating and drinking, they was giving in marriage and marrying. Life was just going on. And he said, and that's kind of the idea here, is life will just be going on in our own little directives, in our own little ways, not concerned about what was going to happen. But you need to also remember that those that did not get into the ark, those that would not go forth, they all perished. And in the second coming of Christ, all those that have not been looking for him to come, all those who have not accepted Christ, they will perish. They will be those that are still alive at the end of when Jesus comes back to go into the millennium, because there'll be people there that are natural, along with those that are in eternity. So know those things, and he's given us that illustration of, well, this is what's going to happen, and be reminded of. Verse 40, 41, and 42, then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour the Lord is coming. Again, he brings it back to verse 36. Only my Father knows the time. Now, does Jesus know today? He's in heaven. He's with the Father. More than likely, yes, he will. He knows now. We can assume that. But he's saying, when he's talking about there's 2 in the field, one is taken, one's left. One will be waiting and looking for the Lord as they're doing their work, and the other left behind because they didn't expect the Lord to come. They didn't expect him to be there, and they weren't following him. So we see this idea that 2 people may be doing the same thing, but one is looking for the Lord to come back and the other's not. He tells us again in verse 42, watch therefore, for you do not know the hour the Lord is coming. We don't know when he's coming, and we don't need to set dates. We just simply need to be watchful for his return, because it's going to come. It's going to happen. And we need to be always looking for the signs of his return so that we can be ready. But really, we need to be ready right now and not wait until we see signs, but stay ready. Always looking forward to when Christ comes back. Verse 43, but know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken in. Therefore, you also be ready. For the Son of Man will come in an hour you do not expect. So here again, he brings back that idea. We don't know when a thief's going to break in. If we did, we'd do something about it. Well, the same idea here. You don't know, and I don't know when Jesus is going to come back. So I better do something about it now, and that is not only accept Jesus as my personal Savior, but also live the Christian life, which is a greater standard than the values of the world. And so we need to know that, and we need to be watchful. We need to be living a Christian life always, so that we will be ready at the moment that we will see Christ come back, if we're still here. I've had friends who have passed away recently, and they're in heaven today. There's going to be many of us that are watching this program today that may also die, take our last breath here on earth, and be immediately with the Lord. But those that are still alive, we need to continue to watch every day and expect him at any time. Then he goes on and he talks about the faithful servant and the evil servant. Verse 45, who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom his master makes ruler over his household, to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find doing. Notice that. Blessed is the servant that is doing when his master comes back. I learned a long time ago that God can't use me if I'm just a spectator. I have to be about the business of Christ. I have to be about doing ministry. And it's that kind of attitude that all servants of the Lord. And if you know Jesus Christ, your personal Savior, you're a servant. And if you're a servant, you're to minister to other people. Doesn't mean you have to have a title of pastor or teacher or anything else, only that you are in service to the Lord. You may be a caretaker. You may be a bus driver or a truck driver. You may just be a waitress. But you're in the business of serving Christ as you go. Okay? Sunday school teachers. All those kind of things are things that we are doing, and we need to be in that. You may not be called to a pulpit somewhere, but I want you to understand that in your life, you are an example of Christ to other people. The question is, am I a good example or am I not? And that only can be answered by you and the Lord. So we need to be busy about his business. We need to continue to reach out to other people. We need to be showing the caring of God, his love towards other people, and teaching spiritual truths to other people. So let's go on. Verse 47, surely I say to you that he will make him ruler over all his goods. So here's those that are being found doing what they was called to do. He will be given actually more. He will be inclined to give them even more of what good that the master has. Verse 48, but if the evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him into and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, what Matthew is writing to us is the evil servant. We just heard about the good servant that was doing good things and taking care of business, so to speak. But here the evil servant decides that, well, the master's not here, so I'm going to do whatever I want to. He beat the other servants. He was, very rude to them. He decided that, well, I'm going to live it up here, we might say. He's going to eat and drink, and he's going to take care of himself, and he's going to have all the pleasure of the time and make everybody else do all the work. And here the master says he's going to come back at an hour that he wasn't expecting him, suddenly show up. In the same way with Jesus, he's going to suddenly show up at the end of the tribulation period, and he will be dealt with severely for not being a good servant, for not having the respect and the honor given to the master as should be, but was taking for self. This Christian walk, it's not about you and me. It's about us serving what the Lord has for us to do. And so you find out that when the last of 51 says, there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth, that is a picture of torment that will be felt for eternity in hell. It is a complete, eventually complete not being able to have any mercy from God, any at all, whatsoever, at any time. And so we need to be watchful. We need to be in prayer. We need to be doing the things that God has called you to do. Now, that from this praying to giving of your resources, and it may be both. and usually it is. And then there's also to the point of where you are ministering in a bigger way. I'm not a minister of a big church, but they are those out there that has hundreds of people in them that they're ministering to. But yet everyone should take part in that ministry. So now, let's go to verse 1 of chapter 25, the parable of the wise and foolish virgins. When the kingdom of heaven shall be likened unto 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now the 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took their oil in their vessels with their lamps. Now, here's where this is talking about a Jewish wedding, okay? It's not a picture of Israel at the time or in the future. It is about just a Jewish wedding. The same way that Jesus used lambs and fig trees and stuff like that to show something that they would understand at the time. So here he's looking at this and he's saying 5 of them were foolish because they just filled their lamps up, and that's all the oil they took. 5 were wise. They took their lamp full, but they also took more oil with them so that if their lamp ran out of oil, waiting for the bridegroom to come, because they didn't know when he was going to come, they would have oil left over. Okay. Verse 5, but while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and went to sleep here. And at midnight a cry was heard, behold, the bridegroom is coming, so go and meet him. So the idea here at that time was the friends of the groom went ahead of him and was announcing it down the street before they got to the bride to wake up. It is time we're going to have the wedding. It was an announcement before all that happened, because usually the Jewish wedding happened at night. And so the 10 virgins got tired of waiting and went to sleep. Okay, so verse 7, then those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, no, lest there should be not enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy yourselves. In other words, we may not have enough for our own lamps. If they go out, we want to make sure we've got enough. And the same idea here is that we, as Christians, we ought to make sure of our salvation so that we will go into eternity with Christ. And so the foolish ones didn't do that. They didn't get prepared for it. We always need to be prepared for events in the future. Verse 10, and while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Understand that the 5 that was wise, their lamps were lit. They went in, and then the door was locked behind them. So because that way, not everybody could show up. Just those that were with the groom and those that were with the bride. That's all could be there. So now the wedding is going on. The doors are shut. No one else can come in. Verse 11. Afterwards, the other virgins came and said, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, surely I say to you, I do not know you. So what he's saying is, I don't know who you are. I know who I brought, but I don't know who the bride came with her. And now the door is locked, so I don't know who you are. I don't know whether you're just somebody down the street that wants to come to the wedding or whether you're supposed to be there or not. But the thing of it is, they were not prepared to stay. They were not prepared to come in. And it's that way with the kingdom. If you're not prepared to enter the kingdom through Christ, you're not going to be there. Verse 13, watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. Here again, he brings us this illustration of the wedding and how we need to be prepared for the wedding. We need to be prepared for the coming of Christ as the 10 unfaithful or foolish virgins. They weren't prepared for the wedding and they could not go in. It's going to be the same way with us. I can't stress this enough that we need to make sure of our own salvation by being in the Word, by doing what God calls us to do, and by knowing and watching for His return. We need to be prepared about who Christ is, what we're doing is in His will and in His character. We know that we are to follow His commandments. We know that we are to be good to one another. Some people think the 10 Commandments are all outdated, but they all show God's love towards God. And they show love towards one another. You don't steal from somebody else. That's not showing love to them. And so we see those things happening, and that's the way that we should live. And we should always be thinking, I have a phrase that I use when I'm doing something for other people, and that is, if I'm thinking about it, I always ask myself, is God's love in this? And if I don't see God's love in it, then I don't do it. But if I can see God's love in it, then I know that it's of Him and that it is for us to do. And so always be watching for the return of Christ. It could be at any time. We don't know the hour. We don't know the time, so don't set dates. I'm not a date setter. But know that He's coming back. You need to be prepared. Whether you take your last breath and meet the Lord that way, or whether you're in rapture, or whether you go through the tribulation period and meet Him that way, you need to be prepared to go through whatever it is God is going to take you through, and know that He's with you if you will trust Him, if you accept Him as your Savior, and that you will follow Him.